When I went into that ice, I thought to myself, I'm never going to see my family again. I'm never going to see my kids again. This is how I'm going to die, because this is not a survivable moment. And you kick right into fight or flight, into survival mode. And I would love to say that I was brave and everything was all good, but I was scared to death, right? That I was going to die. And especially the way I was going to die, slipping underneath this ice and drowning underneath this, for them to never find me. Stefano tried to reach me, and the ice was, I could feel it heaving, like it was going to completely cave in. I said, don't come any closer. And I had snowshoes on my boots, and I was trying to pull my legs through the water violently to get these snowshoes off that were acting like sails, pulling me under the ice. And I knew that if I could get my boots off, that I might be able to get myself out of this hole. I'd probably lose my feet to frostbite, but who cares? Because I'll see my family again.
Welcome to the To Be Human podcast, Ray.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Ray, I've heard you say running an adventure helped me to redefine how I was. And I think someone with your caliber of achievement, it's very easy to assume that you've always been like that. So I'd love for you to sort of take us back to sort of the earlier days before running an adventure and sort of share with us who you were before you sort of went on this trajectory.
It's a great question. I mean, people meet me and they assume that I must have been, involved in sports since I was young, right? Of some kind, whether it be track or hockey or football or baseball or whatever. And they're generally surprised to know. I mean, it's not an uncommon story in endurance sports, but they're generally surprised to learn that really, I wasn't doing any sports, like organized sports at all. And through my youth, and as a matter of fact, I was anxious about phys ed and gym class. Like I never felt like I belonged with the big football players and all these people that the gym teachers seem to think were so fantastic, that I was one of the people that was just unable to throw a ball or be able to do any of those things. And I think it sort of followed me through into adulthood where, I'm not saying it's the cause, but I just was not a healthy person is what it ends up being. Smoking a pack, sometimes 2 packs a day, heavy drinker, et cetera, et cetera. But I think physical aspects aside, for me, truly, the issue was the emotional aspect of reaching 30 and realizing that, hey, people in my life all around me are doing things. It doesn't have to be something extravagant, but they're doing, like, they have a purpose. They have something that drives them, and here I am just doing the same thing I was always doing, which was getting wasted and really not doing much, just kind of bouncing around. And outwardly was portraying someone who was the life of the party and was the happiest person around, but inside was very unhappy and unfulfilled. And it was my younger brother, John, who became this avid ice climber in the late 90s and mountain biker and paddler. And I saw this guy who lived a former similar lifestyle to me become someone who was healthy, fit, watching what he was eating, doing amazing things, telling amazing stories. And I thought, oh my God, like there's so much more to life. And he said, well, let me show you, essentially. And the rest, they say, is history. I never turned back. It took me a few years to kick the habit of smoking, which was a very difficult thing for me. It was a great thing for me to go through because it taught me that the most difficult challenges that we face in our lives are relative to us as individuals. Mm-hmm. So what you are going through or what someone else is going through may look similar, but they're truly relative to the person who's feeling it. And so how it may not be a big deal to someone else, but it could be a huge deal to you. And that was the first in many lessons that I would take from the outdoors from 2000 onward. So long answer to the short question, I was not a lifelong athlete. And I started all of this when I was like 30, right?
And I find that absolutely phenomenal, and particularly because, only a few years later, you go out and do something that the people have never done before that we're aware of. Can you sort of share along those 3 years, as you said, it wasn't just sort of an overnight decision. There were challenges that you faced throughout those few years. What fueled you to then sort of be part of such a big goal in running the Sahara?
Well, again, it was a sequence of events. And I've always, again, I've learned this from adventure. I've always kept an open mind to the possibilities of what could happen. So, you know, the old saying, ignorance is bliss. Well, I was like, you know, by the time I really turned my life around, so I'm 30, going on 32, 33, I'm racing mountain bikes, I'm adventure racing, I'm doing all these things, but I wasn't really a runner. And then one day I read an article about ultra running, and my brother was an avid trail runner, but I really wasn't. I'd never done a running race of any kind. And I entered my very first running race after reading this article, being so inspired by the people that were in this magazine, that were in this article, that they could do something so extraordinary, but look rather physically normal, right? And I thought to myself, what the hell? Like, what is it these people know about themselves? I want to know what it is they know. And although I'd had like, you know, this engine built up from all this mountain bike racing and everything I was doing, running was different. And so I spent the first few months before this race would start, getting ready as much as I could and transferring those skills from the mountain bike to running. Well, I go to this race, I show up there. Not only did I finish it against any odds that I thought in my mind, I won this race, which was 100 miles in the Yukon. And I thought to myself, wow, I had this idea, you know, months ago to go do this thing. A few years ago, I quit smoking a pack a day of cigarettes. Are you kidding me? And now I'm winning an ultra marathon. We underestimate ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally as human beings. That each and every one of us is capable of our own version of extraordinary, but we're bombarded daily with messages of what perfection is supposed to be, or how it's supposed to feel, or what it's supposed to look like. And we create for ourselves an unrealistic set of goals to begin with that may not even be our own goals, and we can't even see it because our judgment is clouded by what we're bombarded with. So when I did this, I go back to the ignorance is bliss. I just did it because I wanted to do it. And I read this article and I was inspired by these people. But for sure, was it unrealistic to go and run 100 miles? Perhaps. But I did it, and I came out the other end from the lesson saying to myself, wow, when you set your mind to something, there are no limits. Like when you decide what it is that you're going to do relative to your own life, I mean, that's a critical piece, right? Because we're all individuals. You can do amazing things. So I ended up doing a bunch of ultra marathons that would eventually lead me to the Sahara Desert. Along the way, I would meet people and things would happen. And I always kept my mind open to the people I would meet. I started to listen to my gut, you know, and I started saying, this is a good decision. This is a bad decision. Try to go this way. Don't go that way. And before I knew it, you know, I'm standing on the shores, the western shores of the Sahara Desert with 7,500 kilometers in front of us, and Matt Damon's making a movie out of the run, right? I mean, you know, again, it almost was like what the old Seinfeld joke: you can't write stuff like this, right? You know? And so, yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah, I was so incredibly amazed by sort of how it unfolded. And I've personally watched Running Sahara, and I highly recommend that documentary. I think it's so amazing to be able to witness firsthand 3 of you run across the Sahara Desert. As you said, 7,500 kilometers, which is only over 111 days, which to my understanding is an average of 70 kilometers per day, which is enough in itself rather than doing it through the Sahara. It's just incredible to watch. And when I watched it, Ray, I was really curious as someone that was watching it, I really wanted to know more about your headspace during that experience. And obviously we sort of got glimpses, but I'm really interested because it's such a big feat. And as you said, it was only sort of 3 years before that you only really started getting more active and start smoking. What was it that got you through 111 days of running sort of such far distances and such extreme environment?
Well, it's an interesting thing. People ask me, the primary question they'll ask is, how did you train for it? Right. And I said, well, it was actually 7 years by that point, 6 going on 7 years, where I had been, I say to people, preparing for this, the biggest event physically that I would do in my life. I just didn't know it was going to happen. Right. And so when we stood on the western shores of the Sahara Desert in Senegal, I remembered thinking to myself, looking at the other two guys, and I remember everything. So you watch the movie, it's like from 2006, 2007. I remember everything like it was yesterday. And I remember us standing there and me looking at Charlie and Kevin and thinking, okay, they're going to make it, but I'm not going to make it. Mm-hmm. Like the odds are stacked against me. I have not spent this much time on my feet in my entire life. You know, it's just physics. It's not going to happen. Right. And when we got to the halfway point, I remembered there being a mental shift. And I thought to myself, this is going to happen. 110% sure we're going to make it to the end. So it's interesting how your mind begins to change, you know, from a day-to-day perspective. You and I are having a conversation about 111 days, but if you remember what you were doing 90 days ago, you know, so imagine what you were doing 90 days ago. And now imagine you're running 70 kilometers on average every day for those last 90 days. So it got distilled down in my mind. I knew that I was going to go crazy if I looked at the whole distance. And instead, the only way that I could calm myself, because I'm naturally a very like high strung person, the only way I could calm myself with it was to tell myself, all right, so here's the deal. Your entire existence is based in this one goal right now. Like you are enveloped in this goal. So your purpose right now is to wake up in the morning, have coffee, eat whatever, and then go and cross that section of desert, no matter how hard it is, far it is that day. And we had many days in that documentary that you don't see, obviously, where we were crossing huge sand dunes, like 3 weeks, I think, in sand dunes alone. So when we got to the point that we're like sort of like 3/4 through, it became sort of like a factory. You were running on autopilot and you just did what you had to do to survive the day so that you could get up the next day and survive that day so that you could get up and survive the next day. And the application, if you will, to life after that was I realized at the edge of the Red Sea when we finished that this capability of extraordinary was not something that applied to just the three of us, that every human being has that in them when they need it. And it's there. You got to dig down sometimes to find it, but that it exists in everyone, that capacity. And that time spent in the desert taught me that with the right recipe of patience and tenacity and willing to suffer, willingness to just, you know, get through it, that it's amazing. The days start to pile up and you get through these things, you know, and with the old saying, and this too shall pass, you know, those hard things, time is the one thing that in life, when we're through hard times or we're doing something difficult, like running across the Sahara or something at work, time is the one constant that is always shifting and changing the landscape.
And at any point that you felt challenged or like you wanted to give up or you couldn't do this, what was sort of the main thing that you pulled on?
Well, I mean, there was many times when I thought, you know, maybe we won't make it, you know, early on. But it was a different time then than it is now for me.
Right.
Now, when I'm doing expeditions, I've done 30 expeditions. It's very purposeful. I'm driven by a multitude of goals, which we'll get into later. But then in the Sahara, I had never done anything like this before. So I was trying as best I could to be in the moment without sounding too corny and just experience what I was doing as best I could, and learn from it as best I could. Because we ran across 6 countries and we learned about culture in a way that you never could otherwise. You know, we learned about people that became not only friends, family. I mean, Mohammed Iksa, if you remember Mohammed from the film, My second daughter, Annika, her middle name is Iksa. She's named
Oh.
after Muhammad, who's been to my home in Chelsea, Quebec, and stayed with us. And, these people are, these relationships that we built became like family. And so those factors helped to get us through on those days where we weren't sure if we would get through in that expedition, but it's evolved ever since.
And in running across 6 countries in Africa, and I'm really curious about this personally because I've lived in Kenya a couple of times and I just absolutely love that continent with all of my heart. And I'd love to know, going across these 6 countries, what is it that you learn about those different cultures on that continent that you took home?
Well, I've been to the Sahara many times before running the Sahara, right? So I'd been to Libya before Western Libya. I'd been to Egypt. I'd been to Niger before. I'd been to Morocco a few times, all within the span of a few years. So someone who never traveled, right, until they were like 30. I lived in Texas for a little while, but never really traveled too much. And then changed my life. And then I'm traveling all over South America, Africa, Europe, all these places. And I think what hit me and struck me the most in our journey across the Sahara is how we on this planet have so much more in common than we do different. We may dress differently. We have different cultural norms. We have different this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, we all laugh at the same jokes. We all want the same things for our children, which is a better life than the one we have. We want health. We want happiness. We want the ability to move about freely without persecution. These are all the things that are so common among human beings, no matter where we are. And I have found that compelling in the 75 countries or more that I've been in. Sometimes you don't need to speak the language, right? I think that would be the biggest thing. That would be the thing that I noticed the most. Now, I've been to the same regions of Africa where I've been now subsequently, Western Africa, South Africa. I'm sure you probably feel the same sensation when you go there, because we all came originally from there. That when you're there, there's this sensation that you're in a place that right?
It's so true.
And the Sahara for me feels that way. Now, from a background perspective, I'm Canadian. I was born in Canada, but my mom is of Czech descent, and my dad is Lebanese descent. And so when I go back in time, on my dad's side of the family, they're not too far away, right, where they were from. And so I've often wondered, is that sort of that connection point to the Sahara Desert? But it's a feeling, when you're there, that, wow, there's something here, it's like a vibe or something.
And did you, as you've shared, running the Sahara wasn't sort of the only experience that you've had in Africa. You've certainly done a lot more. Have you sort of experienced any quote unquote spiritual experiences throughout those sort of expeditions that you've done?
Yeah, I would say for sure on various expeditions at various points. I think that collectively, for where I am in my life right now, there are too many things that have happened for me to say that there are coincidences. Or, I've had so many close calls where they just should not have been survivable, or chance encounters that should have never happened, but things happen in a way. And I think you derive a certain amount of spirituality, perhaps each of us do. And it's a very individual thing. So there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. It's what you experience. And I think that it's in the details, as they say, of life. And I think that when we open our eyes to what's around us, that itself can be a spiritual transformation, right? Because you're now in your environment and part of it, instead of simply being an observer. You know what I'm saying?
Beautiful.
You're actually connected to the environment and to the people around you, when you start to appreciate that, oh yeah, well, when things happen, I'm just trying to think of a random example in a random life situation. Like, you sit on a plane and you're going somewhere, and this person sits beside you, and you strike up a conversation, and you find out that the person knows your mom from when they lived across the road from your mom when you were little. There are 8 billion
Right.
people on the planet. That's, come on. I mean, the odds are infinitely impossible that that should happen, but it happens. Why does it happen, right? So I think it's when we open our minds to these things, and on these journeys and on these expeditions, I wish I could say to you, I've seen something that um, is just so awe-inspiring that it causes a spiritual effect. I've seen a lot of amazing things, extraordinary things in different environments, in different deserts or different Arctic places. But I think truly it's in what's happening in that moment and being open to the surroundings and what will happen next in these chance encounters with people, or these, that is where that aspect would lie, that spiritual aspect. Does that answer the question, or is that too all over
Yeah.
the map?
No,
Yeah.
it definitely does. And earlier you mentioned that you were talking about presence and sort of being in the flow as like quote unquote corny. And I feel the same when I talk about these things, because I think when you talk about being present and connected, sometimes you kind of lose the attention of some people. But in my experience, like all of the high achievers that I've spoken to and that have achieved so much in life, particularly sort of more adventurous inclined things, they all mention being present and connected. And I think there's such importance on that. And I think there's part of our mind that kind of tries to make it more complex than what it is, but it really is so simple. And it is sort of that remembering, almost what you're talking about, even with Africa. It's that sort of knowing of returning home. And I think it's so beautiful.
You're absolutely right. And I think something else too, that, so as an aside, so the way my life works with expeditions is I'm professionally an explorer. So I go and I do the expeditions that we're talking about. And then I fund my charity, Impossible to Possible, through the sponsorships that help to fund my expeditions. And then the third part of what I do, I have a guiding business called Capic One. So, and a coffee business associated with that. But the way that I really earn my living and take care of my family is with corporate speaking. And so over the last 13, 14 years, I've been very fortunate to travel all over the world, meet some amazing people. I've spoken at TED in Long Beach. I've done events for The Economist, and I've spoken for many large companies all over the world. And I'm getting to the point of why I'm bringing this up. What I have noticed about high achieving people, whether they're fellow explorers and adventurers and athletes, who I've been fortunate to meet so many Olympic athletes, some of the best, the greatest Olympians, or corporate CEOs that are CEO of a company where there's a great culture, where they lead a great culture. They all of these people have one thing in common. It's not just the ability to be connected. It's the humility to be open to being connected. They all have a humbleness about them in their achievements. And I think that is a critical piece to success for people, is that the people that fight dramatically, different strokes for different folks, so whatever, right? But if you spend your time constantly worried about being the best, being the most noticed, being this or that, you're making the journey much harder. But if instead you're embracing your surroundings, what's going on around you, so you're connected to your environment, and you're open in your mind to hearing what others say and learning from others, then you put yourself into a position where great things can happen. It's not like wishy-washy, whatever the term is, hokey stuff. It's reality. If your mind is open and you're willing to learn, it means you are getting more smart and you're more intelligent and you're therefore able to make better decisions. And because your mind is open and you're humble in your decision making, you'll probably make better decisions, and so on and so forth. And you eventually get to wherever it is that your goals lay.
And I'm really interested in that, because How do you balance sort of that element of significance? Because as you shared, you are an explorer. You've done over 30 expeditions. There is a high level of significance that comes with that probably also helps you get these speaking engagements and things. Do you balance that sense of significance with the message behind what you do?
Well, from a personal perspective, so I have two daughters, they're 13 and 10. They're both amazing trail runners. They are flat water kayakers and canoers. They compete at the provincial level. They cross country ski 30, 40, 50 kilometers. How far do you want to go? I mean, they're really, really great athletes. And my wife and I, and my wife, Kathy, is an amazing ultra runner. She is an environmental specialist, an engineer, and as well a gender equity consultant. So she does all these amazing things. I got to tell you something. You walk in our house, there is none of my quote unquote awards on the wall. There are no prizes. There is no indication of what I do for a living or what Kathy has achieved. Instead, we have this giant filing cabinet. Guinness World Record, it's tucked away. Meritorious Cross from the Governor General, tucked away. Not that I don't appreciate these things. I do appreciate them. But in our house, we want their goals to be to the forefront. I know what I've achieved. And so therefore, I don't need to talk about it. I don't need to tell others every 5 minutes, this is what I've done. Sure, it's on your Instagram bio. You say what you've done, right? But I don't need to constantly dwell on that. And I certainly won't do that in my house when I want my daughters to develop their own identity, their own passions, and their own goals. When I'm speaking, if I'm gathering your question, properly, when I'm speaking at events, and fortunate enough to do so post-pandemic, I'm opening a little door. When I'm speaking at events, I am concerned with sharing stories with others, more about how we are connected and are the same, and that the experiences I've had are similar to any other life experience. It's just that it's got kind of a magnifying glass on it because it's so ridiculous in some cases, running 7,500K or crossing the Arctic with a sled or whatever. So it's all similar to, is that making sense?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But so I try to approach everything I do as best I can. And it's hard it's hard. You're stoked about the stuff you do and you're proud. But at the same time, I want to always keep my mind open to what the future holds and not look back. Somebody once gave me really wise advice. I won't say who it was, but this person was incredibly successful in business. They ran for the presidency of the United States. And I had dinner I got really lucky. I had dinner with this person one time, random circumstance. And they said to me, I said, well, you know what? Lay some knowledge on me, right? Like tell me something that I could, they said, well, listen, they said, you know what? I built my business like the way I get on a highway. I'm accelerating all the time on the on-ramp. I glance in my rearview mirror to see what's behind me, to be aware and to know, and so have knowledge, but I'm totally focused on what's in front of me. So I don't dwell on what's behind me. I'm focused on what's in front. And I just thought it was such great advice. And so in my own life, I look back at the things I've done for sure, but I don't say over and over and over again to myself or to anyone else, I broke the world record to the South Pole. That happened. That's in the past. It doesn't define me as who I am. Other things define me. And on that note, we define ourselves. We can't allow others to necessarily define us, right? Because then you enable something to happen that should be within your control completely. So it's about really being comfortable with oneself, right? And defining yourself. And that's sort of the value proposition that I have as it relates to my own stuff.
And more currently, because obviously you continue to explore, and you did share that sort of your underlying why does change. What is it that fuels or motivates you now in what you do?
Well, with Impossible to Possible, so briefly for your listeners, Impossible to Possible is a nonprofit charitable organization that takes young people 16 to 21 years of age on expeditions of their own to remote parts of the world. And then those expeditions are connected to classrooms and learning modules are created around the expedition. So going, for example, to the Amazon jungle in Brazil and teaching the subject of biodiversity whilst learning about the subject of biodiversity from the indigenous people that live there. So sharing that knowledge. And the entire program is 100% free, which I mentioned before, right? So in doing impossible to possible, it has become for me a purpose, not only to support it through my own expeditions, but to communicate with the same students on my own expeditions. So when I ran across the Atacama Desert, I soloed it in summer 2011. Very difficult navigation, a much different experience than running the Sahara because I had very little support. I was getting resupplies anywhere between 20 and 50 kilometers at a time. I had to carry a ton of stuff, find my way across this desert that some sections hadn't been traveled through since the days of the Incans, right? And I'm finding my way through these mountains. And what was driving me was that I was seeing cool things. I was experiencing amazing things out there, seeing extraordinary pictoglyphs and petroglyphs, all this stuff, like really crazy stuff. And I could not wait for the next video conference with classrooms that I had, like the following morning or whatever, to tell them, those students, what I had seen. So it's like this different driving motivation, to get to the finish line each day, right? And the same goes on the Arctic expeditions. It's about shooting amazing content, telling great stories, capturing the photo of a sky at minus 65 when the sun barely breaches the horizon. And that's midday. That's high sun, and barely comes up and then it goes back down again. What does that sky look like? So to be able to snap that photo at minus 65 and distribute it to classrooms and say, here's what the Arctic looks like in the middle of winter. This is what it feels like in the middle of winter. And to be able to connect them to these places, students in Chicago or Toronto or Adelaide or wherever they may be, and have them immersed in the place that I'm in. I learned about this through running the Sahara, coincidentally, because at the end of running the Sahara, the fascination schools had with our journey, they were using our journey as a thread to learn about the 6 countries that we were running through and to learn about the water crisis in North Africa. So that was very powerful for me, that component. That's why I started Impossible to Possible with Kathy and with my best friend, Bob Cox. We started it sort of envisioned it 07, made it reality in 08. And it was because of that concept that learning can be connected to adventure. Experiential learning, great learning opportunities can be totally free. And it can be through one of my expeditions where schools can tap in, or it can be through youth teaching youth peer-to-peer on an Impossible to Possible youth expedition. So it all goes back to Impossible to Possible. And that's why I'm doing what I continue to do now with these expeditions, is to support this organization.
It's so powerful, and I think just such a beautiful story and journey. And I love it how you do hear this often. People start off a lot younger, sort of in that sort of self-exploration journey through what they're doing, and it sort of always tends to beautifully come to a point where then they sort of want to give back in that sense of contribution. And I think it's so incredibly powerful, and I 100% support what you're doing. I think it is so important and impactful. I think it truly makes a difference in children's lives, being able to learn through other people's stories and journeys and what they're doing versus just textbooks. So I really honor what you're doing. And I'd love to know, Ray, because to my understanding, in 2017, you did a 3-part expedition in the Canadian Arctic. And you had a little bit of an incident there in the first part that sort of got you reflecting on your adventures to an extent. And I'd love to know more about your mindset change. I heard you sort of describe it as that experience sort of changed aspects at home, which made me think as a listener that certainly it sort of changed the way that you look at things.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I have to tell you, we are always learning on the journey, right? And going back to that, keeping our open mind, sometimes though, we get onto a different path and we don't even know that we're doing it, right? It's like when I was smoking a pack a day, I didn't know what feeling like shit felt like,
Right.
And then when I quit smoking a pack a day, I realized, oh my God, I felt horrible all those years. There was no need to feel so bad, right? Now I know what feeling good feels like. Or, I used an analogy the other day. You walk into a room that if it's dark and the light bulb's burnt out, you can still find your way around that room. And then when the light bulb's replaced and you flick on the switch, it's illuminated that much more. But if someone dropped you in the room and you'd never been in that room before and the light was out, you'd probably trip and fall over stuff and everything else, right? It's really about being aware of, in your own life and being able to move laterally through life as well and accept changes. So in 2017, I thought it was 2016, but you probably got it right.
It
No,
might
2016
be
was a different, what I could be, but
you've done a lot.
Yeah, exactly. It's all blurred.
Yeah.
We were dropped. I was with a teammate, Stefano Gregoretti from Italy, and we were dropped by helicopter into a remote fjord in the Canadian Arctic. And as you said, we were going to do 3-part expedition. First part on foot across this mountain range. Second part in a different region of the Canadian Arctic. The Canadian Arctic is massive, right? Like, I don't know how it compares to Australia, but it would be like probably similar in size. I mean, it's just huge, right? And the second part of the expedition was to ski across Baffin Island in the Canadian Arctic. And then the third part was to ride fat bikes, these giant snow bikes across a region in the Northwest Territories. So the first part was going to be the most straightforward, right? It was like we picked it as kind of a warm up and that would be our thing. So helicopter drops us, leaves us. We have to move inland on the coast right away because huge polar bear threat in that area. And polar bears, incidentally, are like minivans with teeth. I mean, they're just huge, enormous carnivores, and they are the apex hunter on the planet. You don't want to be anywhere near them, but beautiful creatures. So we move in, we're moving inland, and we've been told that the Arctic in that region, probably due to climate change, had a very unusual winter of freezing and then thawing, and then freezing and then thawing, which causes this overflow, which is layers of ice that freeze at different times with pockets of air on the river system. So to be careful. And we were being careful. I had the most experience in the Arctic. I was scouting ahead. And we were moving up through a slot canyon, fairly narrow, 3 meters, maybe 20 feet wide. And we were almost topped out. It was very steep as we made our way through, maybe 1 kilometer long. And I said to Stefano, hey, listen, I'm just going to scout this one last piece of ice. Stay way back because the ice is adhered to these vertical walls. There is no of rock. There's no shore. So if anything breaks, it's all going to break, And so he was back with our sleds and our dog, I don't know, 20, 30 feet behind me. And I took 2 steps ahead and I'm testing the ice and I'm thinking, okay, it's all right. Third step, boom, I break through this hole. And I immediately go into this river up to my chest. And what stopped me was my arms instinctively, swung out to the side. So picture this giant triangular shaped gaping hole that I'm in. The current is against my chest, pushing me under the ice that's behind me. And behind me, my back is downhill. So I'm sort of being pushed under the ice with my back keeping me propped against, going completely under and being washed away. When I went into that ice, I thought to myself, I'm never going to see my family again. I'm never going to see my kids again. This is how I'm going to die because this is not a survivable moment. And you kick right into fight or flight, into survival mode. And I would love to say that I was brave and everything was all good, but I was scared to death, right? That I was going to die. And especially the way I was going to die, slipping underneath this ice and drowning underneath this, and for them to never find me. Stefano tried to reach me and the ice was, I could feel it heaving, like it was going to completely cave in. I said, don't come any closer. And I had snowshoes on my boots and I was trying to pull my legs through the water violently to get these snowshoes off that were acting like sails, pulling me under the ice. And I knew that if I could get my boots off, that I might be able to get myself out of this hole. I'd probably lose my feet to frostbite, but who cares?
Mm.
Because I'll see my family again. And I was trying to get my boots on. I pulled my right leg so hard through the water that it flung out. And the snowshoe and the crampons on the bottom, those are the spikes on the bottom of my snowshoe, hooked the edge of the triangular shaped part of the hole on the other side that I was in. So like, it was like my leg was like freakishly bent up in front of me. But I was able to, with adrenaline, leverage against that and sort of push up into the side. And so I got up and out of this hole after being in there for almost 2 minutes and rolled in the snow to get as much moisture off and rolled away to a safe point that Stefano could grab me and drag me back. And I was laughing. I was laughing hysterically because I could not believe I survived. And it was like a reaction that was reflexive. It wasn't like I thought something was funny. I was just laughing. I mean, Stefano was looking at me like he thought I was like I'd lost it, right? So I changed into my down. I had an emergency down suit. I changed into that, but I still had the boots on. They never came off, right? So I had no choice but to wear those boots because those were the only ones I had. They froze to my feet. And we down climbed that entire river and found another way out, which was twice as dangerous, but at least it wasn't on open ice. And we set camp for that first night, which was I wasn't sure I was going to get through. The next day, we moved all day through a snowstorm to get to a point where a buddy of mine, a photographer, an amazing guy who's like a National Geographic photographer, and he was shooting a caribou herd, taking photos of a caribou herd with some Inuit hunters at the northern end of our destination. And we knew at some point that we would see them. They were out on snow machines, that maybe 5 or 6 days in, we'd run into them and, hey guys, and they'd take a few photos and then we'd finish up. We called them on the sat phones on the second night in the tents and said, hey, where are you? They said, look, about 120 miles north, 100, whatever it was, 180 kilometers north of you guys. We'll come and get you. It's awesome. So we're laying in this tent, the snow is just hammering, and I'm definitely like, if I'm not completely hypothermic, I'm right there. I'm barely having a hard time drinking soup or anything. And Stefano and I were laying in the tent, and he said, he asked me, he said, what are you thinking about? And I said, well, I got to tell you something, dude. This was both the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life and the best thing, because I survived. I mean, there was a sensation inside me that I had a chance here, a second chance. And I was like, I can't tell you exactly, other than to say it's like you hit reset. Right. It's like you reset me. My emotions were reset. The stuff that used to bother me before no longer bothered me. I had relationships, friendships where I was the one doing the emailing. I was the one doing the calling. Hey, how are you? Some of these numbers of people who would never call me unless they really needed something. But these were my friends. These were relationships that I was clinging to. Yet I had real, true friends in my life who I was taking time away from to manage all this other stuff, and from my own family. And I said, to hell with this. And the circle shrunk, right? Yeah. And I thought to myself, look, I'm all about meeting new friends and everything. I love all that. I love people. It's part of why I do what I do. But at the end of the day, I was not a judgy thing. I let go of all of those fringe relationships that weren't really happening, that were not reciprocal. I just let them go. It wasn't like I sent an email and said, let me tell you what I think. It wasn't anything like that. It was just like, I just stopped emailing, and it didn't bother me. And it changed me in a way that it's like the other saying, water off a duck's back. It's just the things that used to concern me no longer concern me. The popularity contest, I don't give a damn about winning the popularity contest. I really don't. Because at the end of the day, you have to look at yourself in the mirror. And if you're able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I am genuinely happy in that day, it doesn't have to be every day, but to be genuinely, truly happy. I'm not saying, real, for real. You're talking to one person, your reflection. If you can honestly say that you're happy, you've won the lottery. I mean, really, that's what life comes down to. And I have however many years I've got left in me, that I want to really be glass, not half full, but glass overflowing, and do the best I can. Everybody's got up days and down days, but I have a lot more days where I'm stoked and grateful for what is going on in my life, moreover than the bad things that are happening. And that's what that taught me. You know, Stefano said in the tent that night, what are we going to do about the rest of the expedition? I said, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can go on. Like, I'm so beat up. I mean, my face was covered in frostbite. My feet, my toes were black, you know, the skin was going black. And he said, well, what would you tell your youth ambassadors on the Impossible Possible expedition if something bad happened? I said, well, it has happened. I tell them they have to reinvent themselves, that they have to find purpose in what it is that they're doing. They don't just stop. And he said, well, I guess you have the answer. And so we went on and completed the next 2 legs of that expedition. It wasn't pretty, but we got it done. And that was sort of like, that was the cherry on the icing on the cake, right? It was actually going and completing, even after, like, in the first day, the poop hit the fan, that was basically over. You know, we didn't look at it that way. But I'm sorry, that's a really long answer. But at the end of the day, that's what that taught me. And so since that time, everything, my perspective on everything has changed. You know, social media, yeah, it's great. It's a vehicle by which I'm able to share. You know, obviously I'm older, so I have more people that follow me on Facebook, but I'm able to share what it is that I'm doing or what my family's doing or whatever. But I don't care if I win the popularity. I don't care if I have 10,000 Instagram followers, 150,000 Instagram. I could care less. What I care about is trying as best I can to share the experiences that I'm having, what I'm learning from them, and do that for as long as I'm relevant, right?
It's so beautiful, and certainly don't apologize for how long that was, because I was completely engaged and certainly had goosebumps on my arms as well, you telling that story. So thank you. And I think what I'd love to know, Ray, is because you do hear of this as like those life and death situations that just completely change your perspective. And as someone that hasn't really experienced that, there's almost this weird sense of me being envious of that, because I really feel like your spirit and the power behind what you're saying, and that you truly did make that change in that moment. So I'd love for you to sort of describe or advise for some of us that haven't experienced a life and death situation, how do we lean more into this idea of sort of, releasing the negative bits of our past, or, caring what other people think, and sort of living more true to us and what we want to do?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because you know what? I chose to be in the Arctic. I chose that day. I owned it. I owned that it was my mistake that I did that thing on the ice. So because I was in a set of circumstances, that I put myself in that circumstance. But think of somebody who's battling cancer, who has no choice, right? They're doing the best they can to survive a vicious disease. And their outcome and their perspective on life is going to definitely be much more valid than mine. But you got to go back to that. I don't know what that is like to survive cancer. I know what it's like to survive an icy gaping hole in the middle of the Arctic in the winter. So it's a very relative thing. So to say what others should do or could do, in their own lives to change their perspective on, themselves or who should care or not care, like, you know what I mean? It's hard to do. Mm-hmm. But I would say this, that I know that I will offer to my daughters as they're growing up, that their happiness is not defined by what other people say. And their happiness at the end of the day, or their ability to succeed in something, doesn't hinge necessarily on what some passing comment or an opinion someone makes. If that affects someone, it's because we allow it to affect us. We're allowing that negative energy. So what I would share to them as they grow up is that they need to be focused on what we always want to be in service to others in one capacity or another in our lives. And in doing that, it provides so many other rewards that, you know, obviously we don't help other people to get a reward out of it. But what I'm saying is, like, from it makes you feel good in your soul, basically. But that life is yours to live. And I think that in society now, I mean, you and I talked about this a bit offline, we are constantly, whether it's television commercials or magazine articles that have been photo edited, or Instagram profiles where you're seeing the person with the 28 pack and you're like, what the hell? I can't even get a 2-pack, you know? And people making, like, living perfect lives that are completely unrealistic. And then we try to measure ourselves against that. And I just think, and I know, again, going back to my daughters, that I will teach them that is a snapshot in time of what someone else is portraying. And you have to look at it as just that you have to define yourself. You have to live your life for you, because you don't know how many days you've got on the planet. You know, it's not like a video game. It's not like there's a redo, you know, there's no photoshopping life, you know, you're living your life. So it's an appreciation of the life you have and doing the best you can with it.
And you're obviously very close with your daughters and your wife. And, you know, through this experience in the Canadian Arctic, and I'm sure in other experiences you've sort of faced more of those frightening times, where is your line in terms of decision making and continuing with something that is dangerous and sort of making a call and maybe not doing it?
Well, it's happened a couple of times. Just most recently, I was in Death Valley this past July, attempting a north to south off-road crossing, which is a distance of about 250 kilometers, with the same teammate, Will Laughlin, an American ultra runner. And we had done the first crossing of Death Valley completely off-road north to south in 2011, in the middle of summer in a heat wave. Ironically, we got there this year and it was like the hottest 24 hours recorded on the planet while we were there. And it became abundantly clear to me that after 24-hour period, about 20 kilometers between resupplies, 134 degrees Fahrenheit, plus wind. So this wind that just had this convective effect. And there was a little bit of humidity. We were drinking 10 to 15 liters every 20 kilometers.
Wow.
That it was not a survivable temperature that we were in any longer. And it's the sum of the parts. It's all the expeditions that I've done that have led me to a point where I'm like, risk, mitigating risk, taking a risk. And it's like, no question, I know the answer. I trust in my gut. I trust in the knowledge of others. I trust in the process. I knew it entered my brain. It's like a fleeting thought. We can't do this. We will die out here, or we'll put others at tremendous risk to come and take our dead bodies because they'll never get in here fast enough, because it was impossible. You couldn't get a 4-wheel drive vehicle in where we were. You'd have to do a helicopter and all this jazz. So it's like, no, we're done. Just, it's like that. And there's a comfort in knowing that I have the ability to make that decision. Does that sound weird? Like, it's like, did we fail in our attempt to go north to south in 2021? Yes, we failed. Did we make the right decision? 100%
right.
Yes. Do I have any regrets? Zero.
Right.
Zero regrets. And so it's putting, it goes back to that humility thing. It's approaching the decision with a humble gesture and taking the knowledge of the past and applying it forward and saying, what is the right or wrong thing to do? And the answer is as clear as our Zoom call, you know?
Yeah, I think there's so much power in that, and it's certainly got a lot to do sort of with those ego-driven decisions that, you know, I'm sure you've seen as well, that can end up with people in very different places and situations and experiences. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of power in being able to make those decisions for yourself and the right decisions for your family as well. It is.
But what's interesting too, sorry to interrupt you, is that, you can make a decision, you can make the right decision, and still it goes completely haywire.
Right.
I mean, things can go wrong, but we mitigate the risk we're taking risks, we mitigate as best we can. That's what we have to do. I plan my expeditions more than I plan my drive to the grocery store. I plan for years for each expedition that I do. So I take nothing for granted. And I do all the stuff I said before, basically.
And in terms, you mentioned goal setting or goals at the beginning of this conversation. What is sort of your advice for people that may be sort of wanting to challenge their limits and maybe potentially do something that's more extraordinary than what they're already doing?
You know what? Somebody asked me once, what was it like, when you reached the edge of the Red Sea, you put your hand in the water, you ran 7,500 kilometers. What goes into your mind? Like, what did it feel like? And I said, well, the first time when I was training for that ultra marathon I told you about in the Yukon, the winter one, the 100-miler, my very first running race, I'll never forget this friend of mine, he's since deceased, who has taught me so much about running. And he got me to a point where I could run 7 kilometers, 7-kilometer loop, 8 kilometers from my old place where I was living before we were living here. And I was able to do the loop continuously without stopping and taking a walking break. I remember that day. I remember that day being so like, wow, I left my door and I closed it. And I came back to my door, like running all the way. And then I opened it. And it was such like a thing that stuck with me. I felt across the Sahara on the day we finished on day 111, exactly the same. No different from that 7K run. They were the same. It was relative. I think in setting goals, no matter how lofty they are, that we have to approach it one step at a time and recognize the smaller achievements that we're able to make in our lives. I had somebody recently as well. I talked about this actually on a couple of podcasts recently, where someone reached out to me. They said, listen, I've been following your expeditions for years and I decided to reach out to you because I want to start running. And I've never ran. I basically sit on the couch and watch TV, and I'm on my computer all the time, and I don't know what to do. I don't even own running shoes. And they said, I want to run a 5K. Like, how do I do it? And I said, well, what I would do is get off the couch on day one, create a calendar. On day one, you get off the couch, you walk to your front door, you put your shoes on, whatever you have, put on your Birkenstocks, take them off, walk back to the couch, you're done for the day. Doesn't matter what else you do. Maybe you go walking it doesn't matter. You have a sequence of events that are adhered to the goal. Day 2, you make it to the front door, you exit your door, you walk to the end of your laneway or the end of your block, you turn around, you come back. Day 3, you go a little further. Day 4, day 5. By day 6, you walk to your closest running store and throw the Birkenstocks in the garbage can and buy a pair of running shoes and walk home with them. You get what I'm saying? So it's goals that it's doing things, one thing per day that is tied to the goal that you want to achieve. And before you know it, like the Sahara, all the days add up and you've arrived at that goal. And then recognizing, okay, I'm here. I'm not going to get too crazy celebrating. I'm going to appreciate that I'm here. I'm going to look at what I've done to get here briefly. And now I'm looking forward onto what's the next stage of my goal. It'll happen. But again, we get bombarded with messaging that's like, you can have a perfect body in 30 days or less. I mean, come on, right? Or you can be a millionaire in 2 weeks. Okay, it sounds great unless you win the lottery, which may not happen, right? Unless you're like on the front end of the Bitcoin or something like that. But I think at the end of the day, it's about being realistic as well. And that there is no mountain too big to climb. I mean, you can do anything you set your mind to, but you have to, when you set those huge, lofty goals, realize there's going to be a process and you got to dig in,
Yeah, I love that. It's just that sort of element of kindness and compassion that you need for yourself. And as you shared, it's just one step at a time. And don't get overwhelmed by the big picture and just do one thing at a time. So Ray, thank you so much for this conversation. I truly appreciate everything that you've shared and all your beautiful stories and lessons. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here.
So I'd love to ask you, Ray, on a final note, what does it mean to you to be human?
I think you told me you were going to ask me this, and I thought, oh, I'll have an answer. And then now here I am. I think to be human is to realize that we are individuals and we all have those relative goals and those relative dreams and things that we want to make happen. But to be human means we are sewn together in a community, and the community is global. It's not just in our little town that we might live in or our city, but in fact, it's with everyone around the world, that we are on this same planet, obviously. And so to be human means to contribute to one another. It means to celebrate with one another. But I think being human is to truly love that other person and appreciate that other person, no matter whether you agree with them or not, because we all come, at the very bottom line of it from more or less the same place,